Last week, we spent some time discussing what it takes to lay a good foundation when you are preparing to analyze an effect and its various causes. We discussed how you first want to look for logical sequences or connections between two or more occurrences or events. We also talked about weighing different potential causes together to form more accurate links between cause and effect. You had a chance to look for these techniques in an example essay, and hopefully that essay helped you to recognize some of the effective ways to set up a cause and effect analysis. And maybe you were able to identify some areas where the analysis could be expanded even further. Today, we'll build on that concept by examining some additional goals that we can consider as we develop our analysis further. So once you've completed those primary steps, the next step you want to take after you have identified some potential causal links and explored different options is to decide what is the most logical causal order. For example, last week I was discussing my apple tree and how the fruit on it tastes better during dry years and has less bug damage. I would need to analyze that situation by considering some logical progressions, like the lack of water has to come first, since it's the bugs that need the water to lay their eggs. Therefore, I know that the lack of water is a cause for the bugs not being able to reproduce abundantly, and not vice versa. The next logical step would be to note that since there are fewer bugs, they can't do as much damage to my apples. It's important to remember that we can easily mix up the logic in a cause and effect argument if we aren't careful. If that happens, we're going to have big problems. We could end up making a very inaccurate or weak argument in our essay if we're not very careful about it. I'd like to illustrate this idea with a practice with some pictures. This is going to require that you open the practice attachment I included with this week. It's titled Storyline Scramble. You'll notice right away when you open it that it's a jumble of images that create a comic strip, or at least will when they're put into a different order. The only problem is that since they're all scrambled up, they don't make any sense, so I would like you to look at those pictures and number them in the order in which you imagine them happening. So how did that comic turn out for you? You may have noticed this already as you were putting the images in order, but there are potentially multiple stories here. Maybe you imagine the rags to riches story of the beggar who took his last dime to the casino and hit the jackpot. Maybe that's not how you saw it. Maybe instead you saw the sad tale of the wealthy man who lost everything during a night of thrill-seeking at the casino. Whatever story you envision, I want to pull your attention to those multiple stories because the same is going to be important to recognize as you look at your cause and effect links. You need to make sure that you are telling the right story and not drawing inaccurate causal links. Now that idea, drawing inaccurate causal links, actually brings us smoothly to our next idea for this week, which is that we need to make sure that you are analyzing a true causal link instead of simple coincidence, also known as correlation. Correlation does not always equal causation, and it does not necessarily often equal causation. And that concept is critical to consider when putting together a cause and effect analysis. To provide you with an example of this concept, I can come back to my apple trees once again. If you recall from last week, I also noted that the apples on my fruit tree are also sweeter during dry years instead of rainy years. Of course, I need to make sure that whatever I point to as the cause of the sweeter apples, it needs to be a true causation and not just a coincidence or correlation. I would be making a big mistake if I were to say that the lower bug populations in dry years causes the apples to be sweeter. Just because the summers with fewer bugs coincidentally happened at the same time as the sweeter taste of the apples doesn't mean that the lower bug population was a cause for the sweeter fruit. I need to make the accurate statement in saying that the dry conditions created two separate effects, but both of them were good for my apples. The dry conditions made the apples sweeter by concentrating the sugars in the fruit instead of diluting them, and it also created a separate but important effect in that it kept the pest population at bay, so there was less damage to my harvest. Let's identify some examples of this in the world around us. Last week, I provided you with some examples of how the media sometimes oversimplifies issues by failing to identify all the causes behind an effect. What I would like you to do at this time is write down some examples of issues or topics where you commonly see other people or the media or just society in general draw an incorrect causal link. Perhaps you can even see some instances where society tends to mistake correlation for causation. I bet that song really brings back some old memories for you, doesn't it? The list that you just brainstormed should be another helpful tool if you are still not completely certain what issue you want to address. You may find that you enjoy writing a cause and effect analysis if there is more of an argument to make, or an incorrect link being drawn by your opponents. Now that you have had a chance to work with that topic a little bit, let's move on. Once you have a strong understanding of the importance of properly identifying the correct sequence in your causal chain, and you can also tell the difference between correlation and causation, you are ready for our third point of this week. Our third point is to note that there can be multiple causes for an effect, and multiple effects can stem from one cause. I actually provided you with one example of this already in my apple example. The dry season produced two separate but helpful effects on my apples. We see other instances like this all the time. Maybe you scored well on a test and it created separate effects by both increasing your self-esteem and making you less fearful about the next test. Likewise, multiple causes often come together to create a single effect. For example, maybe the combined effect of a pair of worn-out brakes and a momentary distraction come together to result in a single cause, a fender bender for a young new driver. This same concept plays out in much larger issues as well, like debates surrounding issues like climate change or economic trends. They tend to point to numerous different causes that work together to produce one large effect. Last week, you already spent some time considering different potential causes for your event. But, can you identify ways that those causes have a different effect together than they would have had separately? In a similar way, can you identify multiple effects that come about as a result of a single cause, and how those multiple effects might even become causes of their own for a secondary effect? Your ability to do this will have a big impact on the success of your analysis. Of course, as is always the case, the best way to ensure that you truly understand this concept is to practice it yourself. As a final goal for today, please refer back to whatever cause and effect topic you have created so far and most enjoy, and identify ways that the multiple causes of that issue can have a different effect together than they would have separately. Also, identify multiple effects that can come about as a result of the causes of that issue, and how those multiple effects might even become causes of their own for a secondary effect.